Wind screamed through the barn's broken slats, carrying the bite of January across Clara Whitmore's face. Her breath plumed white as she knelt by the campfire she'd built on frozen dirt, arranging stones with numb fingers. The cast-iron Dutch oven sat on coals, the only thing the auctioneer had let her keep yesterday. No bid, he'd said. Worth nothing. She pulled a wrinkled recipe card from her pocket. Her grandmother's handwriting, faded but clear. Apple pie, cinnamon, and something secret. Clara sliced the last of her apples, each cut deliberate. They'd taken her father's land, his plow, even the quilt her mother had sewn. 160 acres gone for $1,200 in debt, 6 years of wages she'd never earn, but they hadn't taken her hands. Hoofbeats crunched on snow outside. She didn't look up, just kept working dough against the split board across her knees. A voice, low and careful. "You're trespassing. This is Pemberton's property now." Clara's hands stilled. She looked up at the man on the black horse. Tall, broad-shouldered, maybe 35. His face was weathered in the way of men who worked cattle, not just owned them. He wore a good coat, but old gloves. "I know whose property it is," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I'll be gone by noon." He dismounted, boots crunching through ice crust. The smell of horse sweat and leather reached her before he did. He stopped at a distance like you would with a wounded animal. "You the Whitmore girl?" "I'm Clara Whitmore, not a girl." His mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Fair enough. I'm James Blackwood. I own the ranch 2 miles west." He glanced at the Dutch oven, at the dough in her lap. "You baking?" "Apple pie." "In a foreclosed barn." Seemed as good a place as any. She returned to her work, fingers pressing dough flat. "I'll leave no mess." He was quiet for a moment, then, "Why pie?" The question caught her off guard. She looked at him again. His eyes were blue, serious, not mocking. "Because it's what I know how to do." The fire popped. Clara laid the dough in the Dutch oven, arranged apple slices the way her grandmother had taught her, concentric circles, tight as wagon spokes. She reached for the small vial of maple syrup, added 3 careful drops, her last secret. "That smells like hope," Blackwood said quietly. Clara's throat tightened. She fitted the lid, buried the pot in coals. "Hope's expensive, Mr. Blackwood. I'm fresh out." He stood there watching as she cleaned her hands with snow, as she fed the fire with barn scraps. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Finally he spoke. "My kitchen's been cold for 4 years, since my wife died." He said it plain, like stating weather. "My mother won't cook in it, says it holds too much grief. The hands eat in the bunkhouse. I eat alone in my study." Clara waited. "I need someone who can turn a cold room warm again." He met her eyes. $12 a month, room and board. You'd work for my mother, not for me. She's difficult, but she's fair." Clara's heart kicked against her ribs. $12. In a year she could save maybe 60 after clothes and necessities. In 20 years she still couldn't buy back her father's land. But it was wages. It was a roof. "Why?" The word came out sharper than she meant. "You don't know me. I could steal. I could burn your house down." "Could you?" "No." "Then I reckon we'll get along fine." The pie took 40 minutes. When Clara lifted the Dutch oven lid, steam rose with the scent of cinnamon and caramelized sugar. Blackwood's face changed. Something in his jaw loosened. She cut a slice with her pocket knife, held it out on a tin plate she'd saved from the auction. He took it, bit, closed his eyes. "Lord above," he whispered. Clara said nothing. She'd learned long ago that good food spoke for itself. Blackwood finished the slice in 4 bites, then looked at her with something like wonder. "When can you start?" "Now." "You got belongings?" She gestured at the flour sack bundle beside her. Everything she owned. He nodded, went to his horse, came back with a folded wool blanket. "You'll ride behind me. It's cold." As Clara kicked snow over the fire, she glanced once more at the barn that had been hers, at the door stamped with Pemberton's red foreclosure ink. Then she climbed up behind James Blackwood, the Dutch oven heavy in her lap, and they rode towards something that might be a future. The ranch house rose against white hills like a promise. 2 stories, painted white, smoke curling from 3 chimneys. Clara's stomach clenched. She didn't belong in a place like this. Blackwood helped her down at the kitchen door. A woman appeared in the frame. 60 maybe, with steel-gray hair pulled tight and eyes that missed nothing. "Mother, this is Clara Whitmore. She's hired." The woman, Esther Blackwood, looked Clara up and down, took in the patched dress, the flour under her nails, the desperate hope Clara tried to hide. Can you make biscuits without burning them? Yes, ma'am. We'll see. Esther stepped aside. Kitchen's through here. The room was large, well-equipped, and cold as a grave. The stove was unlit. Dust lay on the counters. It looked like a place where someone had died. Clara set down her bundle and her Dutch oven. She moved to the wood box, began building a fire in the big cast-iron stove. Her hands knew the work. Behind her, Esther watched in silence. When the fire caught and the first warmth began to push back the cold, Clara turned. I'll need flour, lard, and buttermilk. Esther's mouth was a thin line, but she pointed to the pantry. James Blackwood stood in the doorway, and when Clara glanced at him, she saw something she couldn't name. Not pity, something else. Then Esther's voice. Sharp. Well, those biscuits won't make themselves. Clara tied on her apron and got to work. Outside, the January wind howled. Inside, for the first time in months, Clara felt her hands stop shaking. 3 weeks passed. Clara learned the rhythms of the Blackwood house. Up before dawn to light the stove, bread rising while she dressed, breakfast on the table by 6. Esther tested her constantly. Biscuits, roasts, peas, preserves. Clara met every challenge without complaint. The kitchen warmed. Esther began sitting at the table while Clara worked, mending or reading her Bible. Sometimes she'd mention her late daughter-in-law, Annie, who'd died 4 years ago carrying Jim's child. The baby had died too. Esther spoke of it like weather, but Clara heard the wound beneath. Jim came to the kitchen more than necessary. He'd ask about the day's menu or comment on the bread, but mostly he'd just stand near the doorway, watching Clara work. She felt his eyes on her like heat from the stove. February brought no thaw. The cold held Wyoming in its fist. On a gray Tuesday morning, Jim rode into town. Clara was rolling out pastry when Esther spoke from her chair. My son looks at you the way his father looked at me. Clara's hands froze. Ma'am, Hush, I'm not finished. Esther set down her mending. Annie was a sweet girl, too sweet for this country. It broke her. She paused. You're not sweet. You're strong. There's a difference. Clara didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. But strength won't protect you from men like Luther Pemberton. The name hit Clara like a fist. How do you know about... I know he bought your father's debt. I know he foreclosed your land. I know he owns half this county now. Esther's voice was iron. And I know he won't stop until he owns the other half. Jim returned at dusk, his face dark. He bypassed the dining room, went straight to his study, closed the door hard enough to rattle the frame. Esther glanced at Clara. Take him coffee, strong. Clara knocked, waited. His voice came muffled. Not now, Mother. It's Clara, sir. Silence. Then, come in. The study smelled of leather and pipe smoke. Jim sat behind a desk piled with ledgers, his jaw tight. Clara set the coffee down carefully. Thank you. He didn't look up. She should have left. Instead, she heard herself ask, Is it bad news? His laugh was bitter. Pemberton's claiming water rights to my upstream land. Says he's got surveyor documents proving it. He finally met her eyes. Without that water, my cattle die come summer. Clara's stomach dropped. Can he do that? If his papers are legitimate, yes. Jim rubbed his face. I'm writing to the land office tomorrow, but Pemberton's got the territorial surveyor in his pocket. Cousin by marriage. The fireplace popped. Clara thought of Pemberton's face at the auction, the cold satisfaction when the gavel fell. He takes everything, she said quietly. Not yet he doesn't. Saturday, Esther took Clara to the church quilting circle. Clara had resisted, but Esther insisted. You work in my house. That makes you respectable. Time the town remembered it? The church basement smelled of lye soap and wood polish. 8 women sat around quilting frames, needles flashing. Conversation stopped when Clara entered. The preacher's wife, Margaret Hayes, 40 and pinched, spoke first. Esther, how unexpected. Margaret. Esther's tone could have cut glass. You know Clara Whitmore. She's keeping house for us now. Polite nods, forced smiles. Clara took a seat, threaded a needle with hands that wanted to shake. For 20 minutes, the women stitched and talked around her. Then Margaret said, too loudly, I heard the most interesting thing this week about propriety in Christian households. Esther's needle didn't pause. Did you? When an unmarried man employs an unmarried woman under the same roof, Margaret trailed off meaningfully. Well, people talk. 3 women nodded. 2 looked uncomfortable. Clara's face burned. Esther set down her work. Are you suggesting my presence in my own home is insufficient chaperone? I'm merely saying. You're saying nothing worth hearing. Esther stood. Come, Clara. But before they could leave, the basement door opened. Luther Pemberton descended the stairs, smiling. He was 50, sleek as an otter, dressed in a suit that cost more than Clara's father had earned in a year. Ladies, I apologize for the intrusion. His voice was warm honey. Mrs. Hayes, I came to discuss the church mortgage payment, but I see you're entertaining. His eyes found Clara. Miss Whitmore. What a pleasant surprise. Clara stood frozen. The man who'd taken everything. Pemberton moved closer. The smell of bay rum cologne made her stomach turn. I trust you're settling in at the Blackwood Ranch? Mr. Blackwood is a generous man, taking you in after your difficulties. My difficulties. Clara's voice came out flat. The debt your father left, $1,200. He said it gently, like commiseration. A terrible burden for a young woman, though I suppose working for Mr. Blackwood is one way to begin addressing it. Esther stepped between them. She owes you nothing, Luther. You foreclosed. The debt is satisfied. Legally, yes, Pemberton smiled. But morally? A daughter's obligation to her father's name? He looked past Esther to Clara. The debt still exists, Miss Whitmore. I merely hold it now instead of the bank. Due April 1st, $1,200, or I finalize the foreclosure and sell the land at auction. Clara's lungs forgot how to work. Of course, Pemberton continued. If Mr. Blackwood wished to discuss certain property arrangements, water rights for instance, we might find a way to renegotiate your terms. And Clara understood. Pemberton didn't just own her farm. He was trying to own her future. Use her to control Jim. The room tilted. Esther's hand gripped her elbow, steadying. Pemberton tipped his hat. Ladies, I'll leave you to your quilting. Miss Whitmore, do give my regards to Mr. Blackwood. Tell him I look forward to our conversation. He climbed the stairs, whistling. 3 of the quilting women gathered their things and left without a word. Margaret Hayes smiled thinly. I'm sure you understand, Esther. Associating with someone in Miss Whitmore's position? Esther turned on her. Her position? She's a harder worker than any of your daughters, and she's got more spine than the lot of you combined. They left. Outside, snow had started to fall again. Esther's breath came hard and angry. Clara's voice shook. He's going to take Jim's ranch because of me. No, Esther faced her. He's going to try. There's a difference. But as they rode home in Esther's buggy, the runners hissing through fresh snow, Clara made a decision. If leaving would save Jim, she'd leave. She'd vanish before April, before Pemberton could use her as leverage. She owed Jim Blackwood that much. That night, Clara lay in her small room under the eaves and listened to the house settle. She'd pack tomorrow, leave a note, disappear into some other town where Pemberton's reach didn't extend. The problem was her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She'd just found steadiness again. A kitchen that made sense, work that mattered. And Esther, prickly, fierce Esther, who'd defended her like blood. And Jim. Clara pressed her palms against her eyes. She couldn't afford to think about Jim. Morning came cold and clear. Clara was elbow-deep in bread dough when Esther entered the kitchen, fully dressed at 5:30. You're baking Annie's biscuits wrong, Esther announced. Clara blinked. Ma'am? The recipe I gave you. You're following it exactly. Esther pulled a chair to the work table, sat with the air of someone settling in for a long talk. That's your mistake. Clara wiped flour from her hands, confused. Esther leaned forward. Annie followed recipes like scripture, measured everything twice, never deviated. Her voice softened. The biscuits came out perfect every time, and they tasted like nothing. The kitchen was silent except for the stove's low rumble. You need to know when to trust your instincts over the instructions, Esther continued. When to add more buttermilk because the air is dry, when the dough needs rest, when it needs work. She paused. Cooking is like living, girl. The recipe is a guide, not a prison. Clara understood they weren't talking about biscuits anymore. Now, Esther stood, moved to the pantry. Let me show you how Annie's biscuits should have tasted. For the next hour, Esther taught. Not just measurements, but feel. The way dough should sound when needed, a whisper, not a slap. The smell of buttermilk when it's exactly right, sharp but clean. How to test oven heat with your hand, counting seconds by heartbeat. When they pulled the biscuits out, golden and steaming, Esther broke one open, inhaled, her eyes closed. One tear slipped down her weathered cheek. "That's it," she whispered. "That's the smell of my daughter." Clara's throat ached. Esther wiped her face roughly. "I couldn't make them after she died. Couldn't bear the scent. But you," she looked at Clara, "you can carry what I couldn't." Before Clara could respond, Esther pulled something from her apron pocket. An apron, cream-colored, edged with careful embroidery, worn but well kept. This was hers. Esther held it out. "Seems a shame to let it rot in a trunk." Clara's hands trembled as she took it. The fabric still held a faint lavender scent. "Ma'am, I can't—" "You can. You will." Esther's voice was firm. "And you'll stop whatever fool notion you had about leaving. I saw you eyeing your bundle this morning." Clara's face heated. "You think running will save my son? It won't. Pemberton will find another lever, another throat to squeeze." Esther gripped Clara's shoulders. "We fight him. Together. Understand?" Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good. Now put that on and help me with breakfast. Jim's riding the north fence line today, and he'll need a full stomach." Evening found Clara and Jim alone in the kitchen. Esther had retired early, claiming a headache. Clara suspected matchmaking. Jim sat at the work table, ledgers spread before him. He'd asked for her help with inventory counts. He needed to track everything before the spring cattle drive. Clara dried dishes and called out numbers as he recorded them. 42 head in the east pasture, she read from his notes. Jim's pencil scratched across paper. The sound was oddly intimate in the quiet kitchen. "You're good with figures," he observed. "My father taught me. He said a woman who couldn't count was a woman who'd be cheated." She set down a plate carefully. He was right about that, at least. Jim looked up. He wasn't right about much else. Clara shrugged. He was a kind man, a hopeful man. He thought hard work and honesty were enough. She met Jim's eyes. They weren't. No. Jim's voice was rough. They rarely are. They worked in silence for a few minutes. Then Jim said, "I saw the Pemberton land purchases column in my ledger. You noticed it." Clara's hands stilled in the dishwater. 12 properties in 3 years, Jim continued. All foreclosed. All along what will be the railroad route when it comes through. He leaned back. He's not just greedy. He's building an empire. Can you stop him? I don't know, but I'm going to try. Jim's jaw set. Starting with those water rights. Something's wrong with his claim. I can feel it. Clara dried her hands, moved closer to look at the ledger. Jim shifted his chair to make room, and suddenly they were side by side, shoulders almost touching. She could smell leather and winter air on his coat. His finger traced the column. "See the dates? He bought your family's land in January, but he filed the water rights claim in November, 2 months before." So why file a claim on my land before he owned the adjacent property? Jim's eyes sharpened. Unless he knew he was going to acquire it? Unless the whole thing was planned? Clara's pulse quickened. You think he created my father's debt? I think he bought it cheap from whoever held it, then called it due, knowing your father couldn't pay. Jim's hand clenched on the table. And I think his surveyor documents are as real as a $3 bill. Their eyes met, held. "Jim," Clara started. His hand moved to cover hers on the ledger. For 3 heartbeats, neither of them breathed. His palm was warm, calloused, steady. Then the kitchen door swung open. Esther stood there with an armload of firewood, eyebrows raised. "Don't let me interrupt." Jim pulled his hand back like he'd touched a hot stove. Clara busied herself with the dishes, face burning, but when she glanced at the window, she saw their reflection in the darkened glass. Jim was smiling, just barely, and so was she. March came in cold and mean. Jim rode to the land office in Cheyenne, was gone 3 days. When he returned, his face told Clara everything before he spoke. "Pemberton's documents look legitimate," he said, standing in the kitchen doorway while Clara kneaded bread. "Official stamps, surveyor's seal, filed properly. But you don't believe them." "No, but belief doesn't matter. Law does." He pulled off his hat, turned it in his hands. "I hired a lawyer, Ben Cosgrove, out of Cheyenne. He says contesting the claim will take 60 days minimum in territorial court." Claire's hands stilled in the dough. "The spring thaw is in 8 weeks. I know. Your cattle will die of thirst if I can't move them to upstream pasture." Jim's voice was flat. Pemberton knows it. That's why he filed now. The bread dough blurred in Clara's vision. This was her fault. All of it. There's more, Jim said quietly. Cosgrove's fee is $800. Half now, half when it's done. $800. 4 months of Jim's gross income from cattle sales. Don't, Jim said, reading her face. Don't you dare blame yourself. But she did. Of course she did. The next morning, Jim rode out before dawn to check fence lines. Clara was pulling bread from the oven when hoofbeats sounded in the yard. Too early for Jim to be back. She wiped her hands, went to the window. Luther Pemberton sat astride a bay gelding, looking at the house like he was already calculating its worth. Clara's heart kicked. She glanced toward Esther's room, still quiet. The hands were all in the far pasture. She was alone. Pemberton dismounted, tied his horse, walked to the kitchen door, knocked like a gentleman. Clara opened it, said nothing. Miss Whitmore? He smiled, removing his hat. The morning sun caught silver in his hair. I apologize for calling so early. Is Mr. Blackwood at home? No. Ah, unfortunate. He made no move to leave. Perhaps you could give him a message? Clara waited. I understand he's hired Ben Cosgrove. Expensive choice. Pemberton's voice was pleasant, conversational. $800, I believe, plus court costs, and all for a case he'll lose. You don't know that? Don't I? Pemberton's smile widened. Miss Whitmore, I've been acquiring land in this territory for 20 years. I know every surveyor, every clerk, every judge. Mr. Blackwood is tilting at windmills. The smell of bread filled the space between them. Pemberton glanced past her into the warm kitchen, and something predatory flickered in his eyes. There's an easier way, he said. I'm prepared to purchase Mr. Blackwood's water rights for $800, enough to cover his legal fees at least. And in exchange, he paused, I'd be willing to reduce your father's debt, say to $600, payable over 2 years. Clara's hands clenched in her apron. Why would you do that? Because I'm a businessman, not a monster. And because... He stepped closer, voice dropping. I think you have influence here, more than you realize. She understood then. He was offering to buy her, use her to pressure Jim into surrendering. Get off this property, Clara said. Pemberton's pleasant mask slipped. Miss Whitmore, you're in no position. Now. For a moment his face went cold. Then the smile returned, but it was different. Sharp. You should know, he said quietly, that I visited Reverend Hayes yesterday. Paid off the church mortgage, $500. He was very grateful. Pemberton put his hat back on. I imagine he'll be quite vocal about Christian morality in households where unmarried men and women cohabitate, even with elderly chaperones. Clara's stomach turned to ice. The court of law is slow, Miss Whitmore, but the court of public opinion? He mounted his horse. That moves fast. Ask yourself, how long before the town's judgment makes your position here untenable? How long before Mr. Blackwood's reputation suffers? Before his business suffers? He turned the horse. My offer stands until April 1st. After that, I finalize your farm's sale and file for water access. Good day, Miss Whitmore. Do give my regards to Mr. Blackwood. He rode out. Clara stood in the doorway, shaking. Sunday. The church was full. Clara sat between Jim and Esther in the third pew, acutely aware of the eyes on her back, the whispers that had started yesterday at the mercantile, the way Mrs. Hayes had pulled her daughter away when Clara approached. Reverend Hayes climbed to the pulpit, cleared his throat. This morning, he began, I feel called to speak on the subject of propriety in Christian homes. Esther's spine went rigid. For 20 minutes, Hayes preached about temptation, about appearances of impropriety, about the sacred duty of community to guard moral standards. He never said Clara's name. He didn't have to. By the end, Clara could barely breathe. The walls pressed in, her face burned with shame so hot it felt like fever. The closing hymn started. Clara stood with everyone else, but she couldn't sing, couldn't make her lungs work right. Halfway through the second verse, Esther picked up her Bible, walked out of the pew, down the center aisle. Clara scrambled to follow. The hymn faltered. People turned. Outside, Clara gasped air like a drowning person. Esther's face was stone. We won't be back, Esther said. Hoofbeats. Jim rode up. He'd been late, had waited outside with the horses. He took in their faces, looked back at the church. What happened? Your Clara just got sermonized, Esther said. You planning to let that stand? Jim's jaw set. He dismounted, handed Esther the reins. Take her home." "Jim," Clara started, but he was already striding toward the church. He didn't knock, just opened the doors mid-hymn and walked straight down the aisle. The singing died. "Reverend Hayes," Jim's voice carried. "A word. In your office. Now." Hayes's face went pale. He looked to the congregation as if for support, but no one moved. "Mr. Blackwood, perhaps after the service." "Now!" The two men disappeared into the back room. The church sat in stunned silence. Through the closed office door, Jim's voice rose, not the words, but the fury behind them. Then, "Who paid for that sermon, Reverend? Because it sure as hell wasn't God." They rode home in silence, Jim's face like thunder. That evening, Samuel Torres came to the ranch. The blacksmith was 45, weathered, with burn scars on both forearms and steady hands. He brought a woman, small, nervous, maybe 30. She clutched a shawl around her shoulders and wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. "This is Maria," Sam said. "She cleans the bank, Pemberton's office." They sat in the kitchen. Maria's hands shook as she accepted coffee from Clara. "Tell them," Sam urged gently, in Spanish. Maria spoke haltingly, in broken English supplemented by Sam's translation. She'd been cleaning Pemberton's fireplace 2 weeks ago, found burned papers, not fully consumed. Maps, she thought, with numbers, coordinates. She'd saved some of the ashes in a cloth, been too frightened to tell anyone until Sam had come to the forge, had shown her kindness, had made her feel safe. Now she pulled a bundle from her coat, unwrapped it carefully. Fragments of paper, edges black and curled. But visible, barely, were marks, survey lines, a territorial seal, partially intact. Jim's hands trembled as he held the cloth to lamplight. Why would he burn survey maps? "Because," Sam said quietly, "they showed something different than what he filed." The kitchen went silent, except for the clock's tick. Clara thought of Pemberton's smile, his certainty, his carefully constructed empire of paper and lies. "This is evidence," Jim said. "Maybe." Sam's voice was cautious. "Maybe not enough, but it's a start." Maria spoke rapidly in Spanish. Sam listened, then translated. "She says he's been burning things for months, every Friday after the bank closes. Whatever it is, he doesn't want it found." Jim looked at the blacksmith. "Can you help her keep looking? Carefully?" "She's risking her job. Her children—" "I'll pay her," Jim interrupted. "Whatever she makes at the bank. And if Pemberton fires her, she works for me. I'll put it in writing." Maria's eyes filled. She nodded. After they left, Clara and Jim stood in the kitchen. The ash fragments lay on the table between them like accusation. "He's going to know someone talked," Clara said. "I know." Jim's face was grim. "But if these prove fraud, federal fraud, then we have him. And if they don't," Jim looked at her, really looked, in a way that made her chest ache, "then I lose the ranch, and you lose your farm, and Pemberton wins." He paused. "But at least we'll have tried." Clara wanted to say something, anything, but the words stuck in her throat. Jim turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "Clara, what you did today, walking out of that church with my mother, that took more courage than anything I've seen." Then he was gone, and Clara was alone with the ghost smell of burned paper and the knowledge that they'd just started a war they might not win. 3 days of silence from Jim. He ate in his study, left before dawn, returned after dark. Clara understood. He was giving Pemberton no ammunition, no appearance of impropriety, protecting her by staying away. It felt like dying by inches. Clara threw herself into work, baked enough bread for the ranch hands and half the county. On Thursday morning, she wrapped 3 extra loaves in cloth, loaded them in a basket with butter and jam. "Where are you going?" Esther asked. "Town, Sam's forge." Esther studied her. "Be careful. People are watching." "Let them watch." The ride took 40 minutes. The forge sat at the edge of town, near enough to be convenient, far enough to avoid complaints about the noise. Clara heard the hammer ring before she saw the building. Rhythmic, steady, almost musical. Sam looked up when she entered, face shining with sweat despite the cold. The forge glowed orange hot. The smell of coal smoke and hot iron filled the space. "Miss Clara." He set down his hammer. "This is a surprise." She held out the basket. "Thought you might be hungry." His face softened. "You didn't have to." "I know." They sat on crates near the forge's warmth. Sam broke bread, slathered it with butter, ate like a man who'd forgotten breakfast. Clara watched the coals, gathering courage. Sam, can I ask you something? Of course. Why are you helping us? You barely know Jim. You don't know me at all. Sam was quiet for a moment, chewing. Then, you know what they call me in town? El Mexicano. The Mexican, like I got no name. He brushed crumbs from his hands. Pemberton, he came to my forge 5 years ago. His horse needed shoes. I did good work. When I told him the price, he laughed, said I don't pay Mexican rates, threw half what I asked on the floor, rode off. Claire's hands clenched. I picked up those coins, Sam continued, fed my family, but I didn't forget. He looked at her. A man who treats one person like dirt will treat everyone like dirt. Given time, you, me, Maria, we're just tools to him, and I'm done being a tool. The forge hissed and popped. Besides, Sam added, almost smiling, Jim Blackwood paid full price. First time, no questions, that's worth remembering. Clara felt something loosen in her chest. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We haven't won anything. But we're trying, that counts for something. Sam nodded slowly. See, it does. The door opened. Maria entered, glancing over her shoulder like a frightened bird. She clutched something wrapped in her apron. I found more, she whispered. That evening, Clara was setting the table when Jim came to the kitchen. Actually came in, instead of hovering in the doorway. Mother's eating with the widow Morrison tonight, he said. So it's just us. Clara's hands fumbled the silverware. They ate in awkward silence at first. Then Jim said, Sam showed me what Maria found. More burned fragments. Enough to see that the original survey boundaries don't match what Pemberton filed. Is it enough for the sheriff? Maybe. Wade Hollister's honest, but he's careful. He'll need more than ashes to arrest a man like Pemberton. Jim set down his fork. But it's a start. More silence. Clara pushed food around her plate. Why did you do it? Jim asked suddenly. Do what? Walk out of that church. You could have stayed, weathered it, but you followed my mother. Clara met his eyes. Because what Hayes said was wrong, and because... She stopped. Because? Because you deserved better. The words came out quiet but firm. Your mother deserved better, and maybe I deserve better too. Jim's expression shifted, softened. Clara. I should pack, she interrupted, standing. If I leave before April, Pemberton loses his leverage. You keep your ranch. Everyone wins. Everyone? Jim stood too, moved around the table. Clara, stop. But she was already gathering dishes, hands shaking. I mean it, Jim. If I'm gone, he can't. If you're gone, I'll follow you. The dish slipped from Clara's hands, shattered on the floor. They both stared at the broken pieces. You can't say things like that, Clara whispered. Why not? It's true. Jim's voice was rough. You think I don't know what you were planning? Saw you mending your travel dress. Saw you counting what little money you have. Jim, you'd lose everything. I've already lost everything that mattered. Once. His jaw worked. My wife, my child. I built this ranch because I needed something to fill the silence. But Clara, he took a step closer. You didn't fill the silence. You made me want to hear things again. Laughter, music, the sound of someone else breathing in the house. Clara couldn't speak past the ache in her throat. So no, Jim said quietly. You're not leaving, and I'm not letting Pemberton take one more damn thing from people He stopped, breathed. From people who matter to me. The kitchen clock ticked. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. What do we do? She finally asked. We fight. We find evidence he can't burn or bury. We expose him. Jim's eyes were fierce. And we do it together. Clara nodded. Couldn't speak. Didn't trust her voice. Jim knelt, began picking up shattered dish pieces. Clara knelt too, their hands working side by side. I'll replace this, Jim said. It's just a dish. Even so. Their fingers brushed over a shard. Jim's hand closed gently over hers. Neither of them moved. Outside, the March wind howled. Inside, the kitchen was warm. Finally, Jim released her hand, stood, helped her up. We'll find a way, he said. Clara wanted to believe him. She had to believe him, because the alternative was unbearable. April arrived with cold rain and mud that sucked at boots. The snow was gone, but spring felt tentative, unconvinced. Clara watched ice break up in the water troughs and thought about time running out. Pemberton's deadline was 3 weeks away. On a gray Tuesday, Clara was baking when she heard raised voices from the yard. She looked out to see Jim arguing with a man on horseback, someone she didn't recognize. After a heated exchange, the rider left. Jim stood in the rain, hat in hand, shoulders rigid. He came in dripping, tracked mud across the floor Clara had just scrubbed. "What happened?" she asked. "Surveyor, Pemberton sent him to mark the disputed boundary line." Jim's voice was tight. "Putting stakes on land that's been mine for 7 years. Had the audacity to act like he was doing me a favor, showing me where my property actually ends." Clara's stomach twisted. "Did you—" "I didn't touch him, though God knows I wanted to." Jim stripped off his wet coat. "But Clara, those stakes are 60 feet inside my fence line. If his claim holds, I lose not just the water access, but prime grazing land." "Can we pull them up?" "That's destruction of surveyor's markers. Criminal offense." Jim laughed bitterly. Pemberton's got all his angles covered. That night, Esther didn't come down for supper. Clara brought a tray to her room, found the older woman sitting by the window staring at nothing. "Not hungry," Esther said. "You need to eat." "I need my son not to lose everything his father built." Esther's voice cracked. "And I need that snake Pemberton to choke on his own venom." Clara set down the tray, sat on the edge of the bed. "We're going to fight him," she said. "With what? Ashes and hope?" Esther turned. Her eyes were red. "You're a sweet girl, Clara, but sweetness doesn't win wars." "Good thing I'm not sweet, then." Esther almost smiled. Almost. Sunday came again. Clara had dreaded it, but Esther insisted they go to church. Not to Hayes's church, but to the small Catholic chapel on the south edge of town where Father Gonzalez held Spanish Mass. "If Hayes wants to condemn us," Esther said, "let him do it to an empty pew." They sat in the back. The service was in Spanish and Latin. Clara understood maybe 1 word in 10, but the ritual had a kind of peace. The smell of incense, the murmur of prayer, the sense that some things were bigger than Pemberton's schemes. After Mass, they stood outside. Father Gonzalez greeted parishioners at the door. When he saw them, surprise flickered across his weathered face. "Mrs. Blackwood, this is unexpected. My usual church has become unwelcoming." Esther's tone was dry. The priest's eyes sharpened. "I see. And this is?" "Clara Whitmore. She keeps house for us." Father Gonzalez took Clara's hand in both of his. His grip was warm. "I knew your father. Good man. I was sorry to hear of his troubles." Something in Clara's chest cracked. "Thank you, Father." They were turning to leave when a commotion erupted across the street. At Reverend Hayes's church, the congregation was streaming out, and in the center of the crowd stood Luther Pemberton, shaking hands, smiling, playing the role of pillar of the community. He saw them. His smile widened. He crossed the muddy street. "Mrs. Blackwood, Miss Whitmore, Father." Pemberton nodded to each in turn. "Lovely morning." "Mr. Pemberton." Esther's voice could have frozen whiskey. "I wanted to let you know," Pemberton said pleasantly, "that I've been in discussions with the Territorial Land Office. They're prepared to hear my water rights case next week. Given the clear documentation, I expect a swift resolution." "You mean a swift theft?" Esther snapped. Now, the law is the law. I'm simply exercising my legal rights." He turned to Clara. "And Miss Whitmore, I haven't forgotten our previous conversation. My offer still stands. $600, payable over 2 years. All Mr. Blackwood has to do is sign over his water rights. Everyone wins." "Everyone except Jim," Clara said. "Mr. Blackwood will adapt. He's a resourceful man." Pemberton's eyes glittered. "Of course, if he chooses to fight and loses, which he will, he'll owe $800 in legal fees with nothing to show for it. Seems foolish, doesn't it? Pride is expensive." Father Gonzalez spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "Mr. Pemberton, it's the Lord's Day. Perhaps this conversation could wait." "Of course, Father. My apologies." Pemberton tipped his hat. "Ladies, I bid you good day. Do give my regards to Mr. Blackwood. Tell him time is running short." He walked away, greeting townspeople like a mayor. Clara's hands were shaking. Esther gripped her arm. "Come, let's go home." But as they climbed into the buggy, Clara saw something. Across the street, Sheriff Wade Hollister stood on the church steps, watching Pemberton with narrowed eyes. When he noticed Clara looking, he gave the slightest nod. Maybe they weren't as alone as Pemberton thought. That evening, a knock came at the kitchen door. Sam Torres, with news. Maria had found something. Not ashes this time, actual papers. Hidden in Pemberton's desk in a locked drawer she'd managed to open while he was out. Documents showing he'd paid the territorial surveyor $500. A receipt dated 2 months before the survey. Bribery, Jim said, staring at the paper Sam had brought. This is bribery. It's evidence, Sam corrected. But we need more. One payment could be explained away. We need pattern, proof of fraud, not just improper influence. How do we get that? Sam looked uncomfortable. Maria says there's more in that desk, but the lock, she got lucky once. Can't risk it again without the right tools. What kind of tools? Lockpicks, which I can make. Sam met Jim's eyes. But what you're asking, it's burglary. If we're caught, we won't be caught. Jim's voice was steel. When can you have them ready? 2 days. Do it. After Sam left, Esther spoke from the doorway. Clara hadn't realized she'd been listening. This is dangerous, Esther said. If Pemberton suspects, he already suspects. He's just not worried because he thinks we can't prove anything. Jim's jaw set. Time to make him worry. Clara thought about risk. About what happened to people who went against men like Pemberton. About Maria's children, Sam's livelihood, Jim's ranch. But she also thought about her father's face the day the bank called in his debt, the shame that had killed him as surely as the heart attack. I want to help, Clara said. Both Jim and Esther turned to her. Maria trusts me, and Pemberton doesn't see women as threats. Clara's voice grew stronger. Let me help Sam. Let me be useful. Jim started to shake his head, but Esther held up a hand. The girl's right. Pemberton underestimates women, always has. She looked at Clara with something like pride. If you're certain, I am. Jim's face was a war of concern and respect. Finally, he nodded. All right, but carefully. If anything feels wrong, you walk away. Promise me. I promise. But as Clara lay in bed that night, listening to rain drum on the roof, she knew she was lying. If it came down to it, if she had to choose between safety and saving Jim's ranch, she'd choose Jim. Every time. The plan was simple. Maria would unlock Pemberton's office door on Friday evening after the bank closed. Clara would keep watch while Sam searched the desk. They'd be in and out in 10 minutes. But on Thursday afternoon, everything changed. Clara was in the mercantile buying flour when a young man approached her, 19, maybe 20, with dark hair and her father's chin. Her heart stopped. Clara? She hadn't seen her brother in 2 years, not since he'd left home to find work in Cheyenne, not since before their father died. Thomas. Her voice came out strangled. He looked messin, desperate. His clothes were worn, his boots splitting at the seams. Can we talk? He asked. Please? They walked to the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open prairie. The wind carried the smell of wet sage. I heard about Pa, Thomas said. About the farm. I'm sorry I wasn't there. Where were you? Working, trying to. Jobs are scarce. He kicked at a rock. Clara, I need help. I'm broke. I've got maybe $3 to my name. Clara's stomach tightened. I can't give you money, Thomas. I barely have any myself. I know, but maybe... He hesitated. Maybe Mr. Blackwood could give me work. I'm strong. I can do ranch work. Something in his voice felt wrong, too eager, too calculated. I can ask him, Clara said carefully. Good. That's good. Thomas smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I heard you're living there, at his ranch. I work in his kitchen. Right, kitchen. Thomas's smile turned strange. Must be nice. Big house, good food, after what we had. Thomas, what's this really about? Nothing. He looked away. I heard some men talking in Cheyenne, about Blackwood, about his troubles with Pemberton. Clara's blood went cold. What men? Just men, in a saloon. Thomas wouldn't meet her eyes. They said Pemberton's going to win, said Blackwood's desperate. Who were they, Thomas? I don't know, just men. He backed away. Look, I've got to go, but I'll come by the ranch tomorrow to ask about work. He left before Clara could press him further. She stood there, wind whipping her skirt, dread settling in her bones like winter cold. That night, Clara told Jim about Thomas's visit. Jim's face went carefully blank. Did he ask anything specific? About my finances, my plans? No, but Jim, the way he acted. I know. Jim's voice was tight. We'll talk to him when he comes tomorrow. But Thomas didn't come in the morning. He came at dusk when Jim was checking the cattle and Esther was resting. Clara answered his knock. Thomas stood on the porch, hands in his pockets, eyes shifty. Mr. Blackwood around? He's in the barn. Thomas, we need to talk. I'll just go find him. Thomas tried to move past her. Clara blocked him. What did Pemberton offer you? Thomas froze. His face went white, then red. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me. Clara's voice shook. You show up now, after 2 years, asking questions about Jim's business. What did he pay you? Thomas's jaw worked. For a moment she thought he'd deny it again. Then his shoulders had sagged. $50, he whispered, and a job, in his office. He finally looked at her. Clara, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, but I'm desperate. I've been sleeping in barns, eating scraps. When Pemberton's man found me in Cheyenne, said all I had to do was come here, ask some questions, report back. Clara's hand cracked across his face before she knew she was moving. Thomas stumbled back, hand to his cheek. You sold me, Clara said. Her voice was ice. For $50, you sold your own sister. It's not like that. Get out. Clara, please. Get out. Footsteps behind her, Jim, coming from the barn with Sam. They'd seen everything. Thomas looked at the three of them, face crumpling. I didn't want to, but I need the money. I need... What did you tell him? Jim's voice was granite. Nothing yet, I swear. He wanted to know about your finances, your plans, if you had evidence against him. Thomas's words tumbled out. I was supposed to report tomorrow, but I can't. Clara, I can't do it. I know I'm a coward, but I can't betray you like this. Sam spoke, his voice quiet. Then don't. They all turned to him. Don't report to Pemberton, Sam continued. Or rather, report what we want you to report. Understanding dawned on Jim's face. You'll be our spy. I can't. Thomas shook his head frantically. If he finds out I lied, he won't, Jim said, because you're going to tell him the truth, that I'm desperate, that I'm running out of money, that I'm defeated. He moved closer. And then when we're ready, you're going to testify to everything, the bribe, the questions, all of it. Thomas looked at Clara. I don't deserve... No, she said, you don't. You don't, but you're going to try to make it right anyway. Sam pulled something from his pocket, a small leather pouch that clinked. $50, same as Pemberton paid. You give his money back, keep this, clean money, earned by helping us. Why would you do that? Thomas whispered. Because family is supposed to be about second chances, Sam said. Even when it's hard. Thomas took the pouch with shaking hands, looked at Clara. I'll make this right. I swear. We'll see, Clara said. After Thomas left, Clara's legs gave out. She sat hard on the porch steps, shaking. Jim sat beside her, didn't touch her, but his presence was steady. That's the worst part, Clara said. Not that Pemberton is evil, but that he makes desperate people betray the ones they love. I know. Thomas isn't a bad person. He's just broken by the same system that broke your father. Jim's voice was gentle. Pemberton didn't create the drought or the debt, but he profits from it, weaponizes it. Clara leaned her head on Jim's shoulder, felt him tense, then relax. His arm came around her carefully. They sat there as the sun set, neither speaking. Finally, Clara said, Tomorrow, we get the evidence. Tomorrow, Jim agreed. Inside the house, Esther watched them through the window. A small smile touched her weathered face. Her son was coming back to life, and she'd be damned if she'd let Luther Pemberton kill that twice. Friday evening. The bank closed at 5. By 5:30, the street was empty. Clara stood in the alley behind the building, heart hammering, watching for anyone who might see. Sam emerged from the shadows like smoke. He carried a small leather roll of tools. Maria left the door unlocked, he whispered. We've got maybe 20 minutes before someone might notice. They slipped inside. The bank smelled of ink and old paper and Pemberton's bay rum cologne. Clara's stomach turned. Maria waited by Pemberton's office, wringing her hands. She pointed to the desk, mouthed, middle drawer. Sam knelt, unrolled his tools. The lockpicks gleamed in lamplight. His hands moved with the same precision he used at the forge. Steady, certain. The lock clicked. The drawer slid open. Inside, Ledgers, correspondence, deeds. Sam pulled papers carefully, scanning each. Clara kept watch at the window, every nerve singing. Clara, Sam's voice was tight. Look. A ledger, marked Property Acquisitions 1880 to 1883. 12 entries, 12 families. For each, the original debt amount, the amount Pemberton paid to acquire it, the foreclosure date. Clara's father's name was there. Original debt, $300. Pemberton's purchase price, $75. He'd bought it cheap, called it due for the full amount plus interest and fees that ballooned it to $1,200. He's been doing this for years, Clara breathed. There's more. Sam pulled out another document. Railroad contract, Wyoming and Pacific Railway Company. Pemberton's signature, dated 6 months ago. Payment schedule, $50,000 upon delivery of continuous property rights along surveyed route. The water rights, the foreclosures, all of it mapped to the future railroad path. This is it, Sam said. This proves... Glass shattered downstairs. Men's voices. Clara's blood turned to ice. Someone's here. Back door, Sam hissed. He shoved papers into his coat. Maria grabbed Clara's arm, pulled her toward the rear exit. They ran, down the back stairs, through the storage room. Behind them, boots thundered. Someone shouted. They burst into the alley. Sam pushed them toward the forge. Go, I'll lead them away. Sam, go! He sprinted in the opposite direction. The voices followed him. Clara and Maria ran, didn't stop until they reached the forge. Inside, Maria collapsed against the wall, sobbing. Clara's hands shook so hard she could barely light a lamp. It's all right. We're safe. We're... Hoofbeats outside. Both women froze. Jim burst through the door, face wild. Thank God. I heard there was trouble at the bank. Are you hurt? We're fine, but Sam is here, Sam said, appearing behind Jim. He was breathing hard, grinning. Lost them in the rail yard. They never got a good look. Relief flooded through Clara so fast she had to sit down. Sam pulled the papers from his coat, laid them on the anvil like offerings. Jim read them by lamplight. His face went from confusion to understanding to cold fury. This is fraud. Federal fraud. Railroad fraud. He looked up. This destroys him. If we can get it to the right people, Sam said, Sheriff Hollister can arrest him. Federal marshals can prosecute. But we need to move fast. If Pemberton realizes these are missing, we move now. Jim's voice was steel. Tonight, Saturday morning, Sam's forge, packed with people. Word had spread, quietly, carefully. 60 townspeople crowded the space, breath steaming in the cool air. The anvil stood in the center like an altar. Sheriff Wade Hollister arrived, his deputy beside him. He looked at the crowd, then at Jim. Blackwood, what's this about? Justice, Wade. About damn time. The door opened. Luther Pemberton entered, selling. He'd been told there were charges against Maria for theft. He'd come to press them, to remind the town of his power. His smile died when he saw the crowd, saw Jim, saw the papers on the anvil. What is this? His voice was sharp. This, Sheriff Hollister said, is an inquiry into fraud. Sam stepped forward, laid out the evidence. The bribery receipt, the property acquisition ledger, the railroad contract. Each document passed through the sheriff's hands, then through the crowd. People whispered, pointed, recognized their own names in Pemberton's ledger. Circumstantial, Pemberton said. His voice was steady, but sweat beaded his forehead. Stolen documents. Inadmissible. Maybe, Hollister said. But they're enough for me to investigate, and to subpoena the land office, and to telegraph the federal marshal. You can't. I can, and I am. Hollister's face was stone. Luther Pemberton, you're under arrest for suspicion of fraud, bribery, and conspiracy. The crowd erupted. Pemberton's face went white, then purple. This is an outrage. I'll have your badge. You'll shut your mouth, Hollister said, before I add resisting arrest. But before the deputy could move, Thomas Whitmore pushed through the crowd. His face was pale, but determined. Sheriff, I have something to say. Everyone turned. Thomas's voice shook, but held. Luther Pemberton paid me $50 to spy on James Blackwood. He wanted to know about Mr. Blackwood's finances, his plans, if he had evidence. Thomas pulled out a worn envelope. This is the money he gave me. And he held up a paper. This is a letter in his handwriting, with instructions. Pemberton lunged. Sam blocked him. The deputy grabbed Pemberton's arms, pulled them behind his back. Metal clicked, handcuffs. Clara couldn't breathe. Couldn't quite believe it was happening. Then Jim spoke, his voice carrying. Sheriff, one more thing. I'd like to pay Clara Whitmore's debt, Full amount. Today. The forge went silent. Jim pulled a bank draft from his pocket. $1,200. I sold 40 head of cattle 3 weeks ago. Below market value, but it was enough. He looked at Pemberton. Her farm is hers, free and clear, and you don't get to touch it. Pemberton's face twisted. You fool. You just cost yourself— I cost myself money, Jim interrupted. Money grows back. But Clara? He turned to her and his eyes were everything. Clara doesn't, and I'll be damned if I let you take one more thing from her. The crowd erupted in cheers. Someone started clapping. Others joined. Through the noise, through the chaos, Clara moved toward Jim. He met her halfway. You sold your cattle, she said. You've been planning this for weeks, since the day Pemberton made his threat. Jim's hand found hers. I just needed the right moment. Jim, I can't. You can. You will. He squeezed her hand. Clara Whitmore, your farm is yours, and if you'll have me, if you'll choose me as a free woman, not a desperate one, I'd like to court you properly, with everyone watching. Clara's vision blurred. She nodded, unable to speak. Jim smiled, turned to the crowd. I think my mother needs help with a wedding quilt. Any volunteers? Esther pushed through the crowd, tears streaming down her weathered face. She pulled Clara into a fierce embrace. Welcome to the family, child, officially. The deputy led Pemberton out in chains. He was still protesting, still threatening lawsuits and ruin. No one listened. Outside, the April sun broke through clouds. Spring, finally arriving for real. The wedding happened in May, when the prairie turned green and the creek ran high with snowmelt. Not a big ceremony. Clara wouldn't have wanted that, even if they could afford it. Just family and the people who'd stood by them. Father Gonzalez officiated in the small Catholic chapel. Sam Torres stood as Jim's witness. Esther stood as Clara's, wearing the first smile Clara had seen that reached all the way to her eyes. Maria and her children filled a pew, dressed in their Sunday best. Sheriff Hollister sat in the back, hat in his lap. Even Thomas came, standing in the rear, watching his sister marry into a future he'd almost destroyed. Clara wore a simple dress, cream-colored, borrowed from Esther's trunk. It had been made for Esther's own wedding 40 years ago, had been saved for a daughter who'd died before she could wear it. Now it fit Clara like it had been made for her. Jim wore his father's suit, altered to fit his broader shoulders. When Clara walked down the short aisle, his face did something that made Esther reach for her handkerchief. The vows were traditional, short, but when Jim said, I do, his voice broke on the words, and when Clara repeated them, she meant every syllable down to her bones. Father Gonzalez pronounced them married. Jim kissed her, brief, chaste, but with a promise of more to come. The small congregation applauded. They walked out into May sunshine. The smell of warm earth and new grass surrounded them. Well, Mrs. Blackwood, Jim said. What now? Clara smiled. Now we build a barn. Saturday morning, Clara's reclaimed farm. 70 people showed up with lumber, tools, and food. Even Reverend Hayes came, hat in hand, to apologize for his sermon and offer his carpentry skills. Clara accepted both with grace that cost her something. But Esther had taught her, forgiveness isn't for them, it's for you. The barn rose timber by timber. Men sawed and hammered. Women brought food and water. Children ran through new grass laughing. Sam set up his portable forge at the edge of the property. Clara's Dutch oven sat on the coal bed, and inside it, apple pies baked one after another. The smell carried across the prairie like a blessing. Maria's eldest daughter helped Clara cut apples. Miss Clara, why you make so many? Because everyone who helped deserves pie, Clara said. And because, she paused, thinking of her grandmother's hands teaching her this same recipe. Because good food shared is how we remember we're not alone. By midday, the barn's frame stood. By evening, the roof was on. Jim found Clara near the forge, flour on her hands, watching the sun set over the structure. It's beautiful, she said. It's a barn. But he was smiling. It's more than that. It's proof. Clara turned to face him. Proof that when people help each other, we build something that lasts. Jim pulled her close. Behind them, Esther directed the arrangement of food on plank tables. Sam's hammer rang as he repaired a broken hinge for one of the barn doors. Thomas hauled water for the horses, working twice as hard as anyone else, still trying to make amends. You know what I realized? Jim said quietly. What? I spent 7 years building a ranch, making money, proving I could survive alone. He looked at the gathered crowd. But this is what I was really building toward. Family, not blood, choice. Clara leaned into him. Your mother would say that's what family always was. We just forgot. Then we remembered. Jim kissed the top of her head. Thank God we remembered. As the sun touched the horizon, someone started playing a fiddle. Someone else produced a guitar. Music filled the air and people began to dance in the new grass beside the new barn. Esther appeared with a bundle wrapped in paper. She handed it to Clara without ceremony. Open it later, she said, when you're alone. That night, in the small house on Clara's property, her land, hers, Clara unwrapped Esther's gift, a quilt, cream and blue, pieced together over months, hand-stitched with patterns that told stories, a Dutch oven, a forge hammer, apple blossoms, 2 intertwined rings. Tucked inside was a note in Esther's careful handwriting for Clara. You brought my son back from the dead. You warmed a cold kitchen. You turned winter into spring. This quilt held Annie's dreams once. Now it holds yours. Use it well. Your mother, Esther Clara's tears fell on the fabric. Happy tears for once. Healing tears. Jim found her there, holding the quilt, crying quietly. He didn't ask why. Just sat beside her, put his arm around her shoulders. Through the open window came the smell of apple trees beginning to bloom, the sound of the creek running full, the feel of warm air after a long, hard winter. We made it, Clara whispered. We did. Jim? Thank you for tasting my pie that day, for giving me a chance. He laughed softly. Clara, that pie saved my life as much as it saved yours, maybe more. They sat together as the stars came out, 2 people who'd lost everything and found each other in the ruins. Outside, the new barn stood solid under the Wyoming sky. Inside, the Dutch oven sat clean and ready for tomorrow's bread. And somewhere, Clara's grandmother was smiling, because she'd always known the best recipes aren't just about food, they're about love and work and the stubborn refusal to let hard times break you. They're about turning flour and apples and maple syrup into something that feeds more than the body. They're about magic, the kind you make with your own 2 hands. Spring came slow to Wyoming that year, the way all good things do, earned, not given. By June, Clara's farm had a working barn, a kitchen garden, breaking ground, and a small herd of cattle that Jim had moved there from his ranch. The land that had been foreclosed in shame was alive again with purpose. Pemberton's trial was set for territorial court in Cheyenne. The railroad company quietly withdrew their contract. 12 families whose farms he'd foreclosed filed suit to reclaim their land. The banker who'd seemed untouchable was touched, after all, by the long arm of federal law and the longer memory of people he'd wronged. Thomas Whitmore stayed on as Jim's ranch hand, worked dawn to dusk trying to make amends for sins that might take years to fully forgive. But he was trying. That counted for something. Maria's cleaning job at the bank ended when the bank closed. Sam hired her to manage his forge accounts. Turned out she had a gift for numbers. Her children learned both Spanish and English, grew up calling Clara Tia and meaning it. The Dutch oven found a permanent home in Clara's new kitchen. She baked every Sunday. Apple pie, always. The recipe her grandmother had given her, the one with maple syrup and second chances. Sometimes, in the quiet hour before dawn, Clara would stand in her doorway, in her house, on her land, and watch the sun rise over Wyoming. She'd remember the foreclosure auction, the barn where she'd baked with nothing but stubbornness and hope, the moment Jim had tasted her pie and offered her wages. She'd remember being broken, and then she'd smile, because breaking isn't the same as broken. And sometimes the strongest foundations are built on ground that's been torn down and raised up again, better than before. The dust settled, spring stayed, and Clara Whitmore Blackwood learned what her grandmother knew all along. You can lose everything but your hands and your heart. With those, you can build a life worth living.